Welcome to the Marriage Counselor's Corner. Right this way. Your therapist will see you shortly. In the meantime, sit back, kick your feet up on the couch, and get ready to focus on adding very valuable tools to your marriage toolkit. And now your host and marriage counselor, David Taylor.
Welcome everybody, my name is David Taylor and I am your host. Welcome to the Marriage Counselor's Corner podcast. And if you are new to this place, I really appreciate you tuning in today. You are in for another information-packed episode. And by the way, if you're curious to know what the Marriage Counselor's Corner podcast is all about, well, guess what? This is the place where you are going to get credible and tangible marriage-related information from a licensed mental health counselor. Now, over my past almost 2 decades of clinical experience, I have discovered some things that work to make your marriage healthy. And so this information today is going to be something that you're going to want to make sure you apply to your marriage. As a matter of fact, I want you to see these episodes as a masterclass in marriage where I take a psychological and practical approach to marriage education and enrichment. And like I said, this is a brand new episode number 23. And in today's session, I am going to be having a discussion on one of the 37 laws to mastering marriage. That's right. You know, I have a book called The 37 Laws to Mastering Marriage. It was published and released all the way back in 2018. It's my most favorite work of art, the most important work that I've produced thus far. But there's more coming, please believe. But this book is very important. And I'm going to be discussing one of the laws that if you have not implemented by now, you may be breaking. And I'm going to be talking about the law of the pupil. This is all about being a student of your spouse. And some of you guys have heard me talk about this. If you're in our coaching program where we work with standards, we talk about how it's important to be in a place where you're paying attention, you're learning, you're studying. But let's say you're not in our program, you're new to this space and you want to know what this is about. Well, I'm going to cover that today. So I want you to go and grab your pen and pad and take some notes because this information is going to be very important. But before we deep dive into that, I do want to give a shout out to one of my most recent ratings and reviews that was left on iTunes. So you guys know I try to read a rating and a review that is left on my podcast. And so, you know, as a way to say thank you for taking the time to go and publish your thoughts on my podcast. As you guys know, in my most recent podcast, I had someone who was an atheist and they shared with me their thoughts on the podcast. And I really appreciate that. Today, I have someone who's not an atheist, but, you know, I really appreciate your thoughts as well. So I'm going to read this and then I'm going to dive in. So this person writes, "So thankful. I was praying for a book on marriage counseling. I started searching and God led me to your podcast. I love that you share your wisdom and knowledge with us. I started to listen with my husband and he enjoys you as well. So thankful to God for you. Thank you." Well, whoever you are, I really appreciate your kind words. I'm really excited about the fact that your husband has decided to partake in these episodes because you guys know my theory and philosophy on marriage. I guess I'll say my philosophy more than a theory at this point. But marriage, a healthy marriage, is produced by smart, intelligible people. Not just smart people, but as it pertains to what makes a marriage work. So divorce tends to happen when there is ignorance. But when a person knows more, they grow more. So I really appreciate you sharing, and I really appreciate your husband for listening in and trusting me, my voice, trusting your marriage, entrusting your marriage with, you know, the words that I have to share. So hang tight because I got more information for you. And anybody else that would like to submit an honest rating and review, please go over to where you subscribe to your podcast and do so. And I will read it on air. Okay? Anyway, let's go ahead and dive in today. I want to talk about the law of the pupil. And I want to share with you, again, if I'm talking about a philosophy on marriage, this is a principle that if you do not incorporate, well, your marriage is going to be it's going to struggle. You're not going to have a lot of success. And I'll explain why that's the case as I'm working through this particular topic. So let's go ahead and do a master class on the law of the pupil. And if you're following in your book, it's chapter 3, page 15. If you don't have the book, I'll talk about in the end where you can go and find this book easily. But for now, let's go ahead and talk about the law of the pupil. First, I do want to describe a little bit about what this law is all about. And I'll use my book, the chapter in my book, as kind of an outline for what I'm going to talk about today, okay? So if you're following, just follow the book and it'll make more sense. But I talk about how this is one of my most favorite laws. Ironically, I know there's 37, but this is one of my most favorite laws. And it's most likely because of two reasons. Number one, it's overlooked. So most people don't think about this when they think about a healthy marriage. And then number two, it's very artistic. It's the difference between a skill set and an art form. And when you get to this level where you're applying and incorporating this into your marriage, you've moved from or graduated from just doing it as a skill to now treating marriage as an art form. And this law, the law of the pupil, is all about knowing your spouse. And I'm not talking about what their favorite color is or their favorite movie. That's part of it. That's cute. But I'm talking about knowing them past the mask that they present to you. And by the way, not just the mask that they gave you at the beginning of the relationship, but who they become over the years of your marriage. Because guess what? We change, we evolve, we grow, we expand. And you have to know the current version, not the past version or the masked version of your spouse. You have to know them at their core. And this law is all about becoming a student of your spouse, right? And again, if I use the language of a student, that implies that you're learning something. And I know, a lot of times in marriage, we think we know all there is to know about our spouse until we're smacked with a new season. And then all of a sudden we have to relearn some stuff. So just think about it from that standpoint. And for me, I found one consistent thing, one constant. What I found is that early on in the marriage or early on in the relationship, we stopped learning. We stopped studying each other. And I know this is a common occurrence, and I have been guilty of this as well, right? Like before I knew anything about the law of the pupil, I was guilty of feeling like I had learned my spouse. And I know Mandy. I know that thing. I know her like the back of my hand until we went into new seasons of our marriage, and all of a sudden who she wasn't who I thought she was. Not in a negative way, but she just grew. And she outgrew my knowledge. And that meant that I had to play catch up, okay? So husbands, do not be so prideful as to think that you don't have more to learn about your spouse. Wives, do not get so comfortable in what you think you know about your husband that when they move beyond the scope of what you know, you try to pull them back. Don't do that. That's dangerous, okay? This law requires that you assume the role of a student, not an expert. And I want to add all the time. So assume the role of a student all the time, okay? I'm just going to put that out there. This law demands that you remain teachable so that you don't stifle your spouse from changes that they will ultimately undergo over time. And I got another law that I reference here, the law of change, so you can see more about what that means. But more to this point, so you guys know that I'm working on my PhD. I'll be done in less than a year. I'll be done next May of 2025. And I'm eagerly anticipating the end because I'm in the dissertation phase and it's requiring a lot. But one of the things that I learned at the beginning of my PhD program was I had to change how I learned about information and knowledge, especially in my space, the area of my expertise. So for instance, when I first started this program, I was expecting to be taught like I was in my master's degree, right? You know, you have a lecture, the professor is at the front of the classroom and they're telling you all the information and then you have to jot it down, write your notes, and then you got to go back and study. that was the learning that I was accustomed to. But at the PhD level, learning is different. See, they have us use this thing called Bloom's taxonomy. And it talks about how remembering and understanding, that's at the base level of learning and thinking. But after understanding is applying. And then there's analyzing. And then above that is evaluating. Then the highest form of learning is creating. Did you guys know that? The highest form of learning, the highest order of thinking is the ability to create, to take concepts and ideas, and then to create something out of that. I'll go a step further as to say the closest you are to God is when you're creating, right? Now, let's be honest. You got to be in his will, okay? I ain't talking about just nothing random. But when you're applying the thing in you that God put in you that makes you most like him, that's when you're operating at your highest level. And so in marriage, the temptation is to say, well, you know what? I've arrived. I have an understanding of them. I know them. I remember all of the special details about their life. But what happens when you have to go to that next level of applying and analyzing and evaluating and creating? Those are also higher levels of learning. And in marriage, your garden requires all of those, okay? Not just remembering and understanding. That's cute, but that's bachelor level. Now we got to go up to the master's level. And then for most of y'all, if y'all can make it, let's get to the PhD level. Let's be scholars of our spouses, okay? But let me talk a little bit about why this is important. So understanding, again, the law of the pupil is all about just being a student, a scholar of your spouse. But this law is very important, very important. So I'll say it this way. Being a student of your spouse is crucial to the continued growth of your marriage. See, knowing your spouse at their core helps you to not only connect with them on a deeper level, it helps for you to be in a position that creates synergy. And synergy is created when the sum of the parts is greater than what one person could do alone. And in marriage, healthy marriages have synergy, okay? Now, the greater the knowledge that you have about your spouse, the greater the chances of you establishing and maintaining healthy intimacy. Remember, marriage is about two things, intimacy and influence. And we're going to talk about the influence part in a minute, but understand that the greater you know your spouse, the greater the chances of having healthy intimacy. And as I've mentioned, if you read the law of the safe place, the greater the intimacy, the greater the amount of influence that the two of you can share with each other. Now, again, if both of you guys are having influence with each other, then both of you guys should be growing. Ultimately, the purpose and the original intent of marriage, and I'll talk about this perhaps in the next podcast, is not just for you to have somebody that you're in love with and you can have sex with. It's to have someone that can challenge you to grow. Your spouse needs to be a suitable partner. How else will you grow in marriage if you don't have them showing a healthy reflection of who you really are back to you? Okay? And so that's influence. That's influence. But you got to have intimacy to produce influence. And you have to know your spouse to have influence. You see how that works? All right, so let's keep going. I want to talk a little bit about some areas that if you guys can put more of an emphasis and understanding, it'll help you to know your spouse on a much deeper level. So I'm going to list to you 5 areas that you want to spend the bulk of your time studying with your spouse. And then guess what? We're going to wrap up in a few, okay? So let's start with this first area. The first area that you absolutely have to have more than just a basic remembering knowledge of is your spouse's past. This is very important. It's crucial, as a matter of fact. So the most important and often overlooked area for you to learn more about regarding your spouse is their childhood. Now, I'm not just talking about like the basic details of where they grew up, how many siblings, was their parents married or divorced? That's basic, but I'm talking about more. I'm talking about going behind the veil, the things that they don't want anybody else to know, the skeletons in their closet. You have to know their skeletons. You have to understand these things that are often complex and hidden behind the curtain of their soul. These are the things that you have to know, and you have to study, and you have to understand, and you have to be willing to evaluate and go even deeper, because this helps you to understand how their character is shaped, how their personality is shaped. But Before I get too thrown off by that, let me talk about a few areas regarding their childhood that you really want to know. Number one, this is the most obvious, any past trauma that they experienced, and to what degree are they healing? Have they healed? Are they still struggling with their daddy issues? Have they just said, you know what, it doesn't matter anymore. I'm an adult, I'm a grown up, so I don't even think about it. Have they repressed it? Have they suppressed it? Have they ignored it? Or are they so busy that they haven't even given themselves space and time? This is where the analyzing and the evaluating level of learning comes into play, because you're going to have to take that information and analyze, okay, this is why they are the way that they are. So how can that help me position myself to be a helpmeet for them, knowing that they're hiding away from the skeletons in their closet? Some other areas that you must know about their childhood is, what was the intimacy like between their parents? If they can remember, right, it would be nice to know their perception of love inside of a relationship and what was modeled before them. Like, was their parents, were they married? Was there divorce? What were the conditions of their divorce? Did you even learn more about their divorce? See, it took me into my mid-20s to really get a refined view of why my parents divorced. And that helped me tremendously, because prior to that, I operated off of assumptions and small bits and pieces of information. But knowing helped me to understand how I showed up and the deficits that I had coming into my marriage. Some other things that you want to know about them is, like their past, is what they learned about intimacy in marriage. What were the lessons that they learned, right? Listen, I work with so many very complex situations that I would like to share with you, but I can't because of confidentiality. So I'll just say it this way. Just because you're married doesn't mean you're going to get the right message on marriage. As a matter of fact, and I got this other podcast that's coming out soon, this other episode, and I'm going to talk about why there's a huge and severe misconception of marriage that perhaps has perverted and tainted our management of marriage. But what else? Let me talk about some other things that you got to learn about their past. What about their first time failing? When did they have their first major failure? Okay, I'm not going to tell you stories, but I could tell you stories about why this is so pertinent. But just understand, again, if you're trying to look at understanding how to apply and analyze and evaluate who they are, learning about how they managed failure, how they see failure is so important. What about their history with dealing with rejection? You got to know that. You got to know their history with dealing with rejection. What's their relationship with rejection? Because that will define their relationship with protection. Because most people protect from rejection. And in marriage, you're going to have to wrestle with rejection a lot. So how they show up with protection should also impact, or should be impacted by, what their experiences were with rejection. What about who was the parent that they received the most love from, right? And who the parent they received the least amount of love from, right? You should be understanding at a deeper level. This one question would be great. What did they want from their childhood but never got, right? What were the things that they missed out on? What did they desire the most growing up? These are questions that you got to have the answers to. You got to study this stuff, okay? What about, here, I got some more stuff. What about the top 3 most impactful moments, both positive and negative, right? So let's say maybe top 4, meaning top 2 positive and top 2 negative moments from their childhood. That stuff you should know. What about what they feared the most growing up? And again, most guys, we won't talk about those things. But then we end up in our marriage covering all of these insecurities. And you, as a wife, you could see clearly he's overcompensating for something, but he's not talking about these things. He's not sharing those things. So how can I accommodate? How can I analyze? How can I evaluate? And then how can I create a system in our marriage that is suitable for his healing? Right? You see how that works? How can I create an environment that is suitable for her healing if I don't know what she's wrestling with or the pains that she's struggling with because she's hiding them, or perhaps I just never took the time to learn, right? Hopefully this is starting to make sense. What about what did they fear the most growing up? That's another important question. And then lastly, because I can keep going for days, but I'll give you one more question. What about the predominant thoughts that they had about life during that phase of their development? Like, what did they think about life? What did they think about themselves and their relationship to others, perhaps their value to themselves and their value to others? those thoughts, those questions you want to know so that, again, you can apply this information, analyze, evaluate, and then create systems in your marriage that accommodates these areas, okay? These are areas that will help you to connect with their past and with who they are today. You can also learn a lot about their attachment style, which I did a whole podcast on, the 4 attachment styles, but you can learn a lot about their attachment style and why they married you based on what they felt they were missing out on in their childhood. This stuff is very important, guys, very important. So let me move to another area because that was just the first area. I probably will only go over 2 more because I know there's 5, but so I'm not going to go over all of these areas, but I'll go over a few. The next area that I think you should really study regarding your spouse is their personal perception. See, this is important. So this area of personal perception, this is all about how they see themselves, right? This is where you get to understand their greatest areas of vulnerability. This is where you get to learn their flaws, their insecurities, and their areas of inadequacies. And remember, we all carry areas of inadequacy, of incompetency. We all have insecurities. So learning about their personal perception will help you to see how they see themselves. And think about this. Let's go a step further. We often project onto others what we see in ourselves. And so how they see you is most likely how they see themselves. And if you take the time to learn this without getting offended, it will help you to do a better job of creating an environment that's conducive for their healing. Think about it. Do they have a problem with managing money? Do they have a skewed body image? I know y'all exist, so do not act like y'all don't. Let's be real here, guys. Remember, you're in the counselor's corner, so we could talk about intimate details. Some of y'all struggle with managing money, and you have insecurities about that. Some of you guys have a skewed body image, and you're insecure about how you look, but you project onto them, right? Maybe they have a certain attraction to a certain body type, but because you don't fit that mold anymore, now you're projecting onto them. Now you're penalizing them for having an interest in something that you may feel is superficial. Well, this is where you get to learn about personal perception. Do they have personal problems that they try to hide from those who they aren't intimately connected with? But don't stop there. Let's go a step further. I want you to also take this step a bit further and ask the golden question. And you know, I have a whole law about this. The quality of your marriage is determined by the quality of questions that you ask. You should be asking why. Why are they struggling in these areas? Why is body image an area that they are insecure about? What about money? Why is money an area that they struggle with? What about trust? Why do they struggle with trust? Or why do they struggle with confidence or competence? Or why is this person struggling with feeling competent as a leader, right? Or why does this person have an ego that is bigger than our marriage can contain, right? These are questions you should be studying and asking why. See, why are those insecurities there in this particular area? These are things that you want to know. Why have they had multiple failed relationships, right? And if they always blame it on the other person, that's a red sign. But I'm not going to go there yet. I got to stay focused. See, you want to understand the why of your spouse so that you can help them navigate through those things that have stifled them. Remember, the highest form of learning is creation. And so if you can help create, co-create an environment inside of your marriage that's conducive for their healing, that will help them come to their highest self or become their highest self. Okay? Asking why will help you get more information. See, with this information, you can cover them in prayer from a more strategic vantage point. And this, I don't want you guys to skip over this. This is why prayer is important. And if I had more time, let me say it this way. And just follow me for a second. See, you guys thought prayer was just petitioning God. But I want to offer you a different vantage point. See, prayer is not about you just solely petitioning God. As a matter of fact, if you look at what Jesus did when he was in ministry on earth, and you look at how he prayed, every time he prayed, he was by himself. And then after he prayed, he went and did some miraculous things. So prayer preceded presentation. Prayer preceded demonstration. In marriage, a lot of times we do too much petitioning, but we don't pray to become the answer. Instead, we pray to get the answer. And so prayer in this vantage point is based off of the information that you accumulate, right? So if I learn more about my spouse and I learn that, okay, you know what, she is struggling in this area, or he has an anger issue that he's wrestling with, guess what I can do now? I can take that information, I can apply that information in prayer, and then that can help with discernment for me to create an environment that's conducive for his growth or for her growth, right? This is how it works. This is why the law of the pupil is so valuable, okay? Oh man, I talk about this in the book, that understanding their why helps you to be a better helpmeet. It helps you to know how to show up so that you're not always triggering them and that you're not always provoking and prodding and causing them and influencing them to become something that they're not supposed to be. It helps you to show up and be a better helpmeet. After all, that's your job, right? To be a helpmeet. And you can be more strategic with your prayers. You can cover them from a strategic vantage point. And you can make sure that you always set them up for success. I have a whole nother law called the law of the assist, and it's all about setting your spouse up for success. And again, that means you're proactive and intentional about creating an environment that is conducive for their success. See how this is all integrating into each other? This is beautiful how it works. Beautiful. But you can see the law of the assist if you want more information on this topic. Okay, so let me give you one more. I'll go in detail in one more area and then I'll just list the other two. And then I'll give you guys some homework because I'm already at 27 minutes. So another area that you really want to be a student of is your spouse's perception of life. See, this area is important because it's all about how they have positioned themselves in their life. And by the way, we are all the main character in our stories. We are always the center of our own universe. And so you want to understand what their perception is about life and their relationship to other people. Do they have a naturally altruistic perception of others? Are they trusting? Are they giving? If you both were to ride past a homeless person, what thoughts are they having about that person? Do you know that? Like when they are looking at this homeless person, do you know what they're thinking about that person? Do you know what they're thinking about themselves in relationship to that homeless person? These are all pieces of information that would be incredible and extremely useful for you to know. Do they believe that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to people who do bad things? Is that how they position themselves in life? How well do they treat those who are the closest to them? And why do they treat them in that manner? Do they have this do unto others as you would have them do unto you mentality? Like, what's their disposition on life? This information is all about their perception of life. And you want to be a student in this area. See, learning about this information regarding your spouse will help you to know how to communicate to them during conflicts. It'll help you to communicate to them when they're dealing with their own difficult issues or situations in life. This information will also help you to understand what motivates them, right? You want to know the motives that they have so that you can limit the amount of assumptions that you make about them. See, we make a lot of assumptions about our spouse when we think we know what we think is true, even though it's just our thoughts, because we have not validated those thoughts. We have not found a way to figure out if it's true or false. They're not substantiated. Okay. So this law, the law of the pupil, being a student of your spouse, is all about substantiating the information. Because again, remember, we're going up the chain on Bloom's taxonomy. We're going higher. Okay. We're going from remembering and understanding all the way up to creating, which means you have to gather this information. Now, there are a few more areas that I would recommend that you spend a lot of time studying. I'll just list them real quick, and then I'll spend a little bit more time talking about something, and then I'll wrap up. You want to know their relationship with money. So if you haven't studied your spouse's relationship with money, again, you're going to look to their past and understand their relationship with money while growing up, but you also want to spend time knowing that now. What about spirituality? Where are they? What are their beliefs? What are their theological beliefs? Do they have a certain sense of the world as it relates to their relationship with God? Are they a religious person? Why or why not? Right? You want to know this. Why do they share a certain dogmatic view on a certain area regarding theology. These are areas that you must study. What's their perception on tithing? I know that sounds basic and simple, but are they going to quote to you what was quoted to them, or do you feel like they've actually done the research and studied it? And then have you done the research to study what they know, right? This is what it means to go deeper into intimacy. That way, you guys create a system of financial management that is conducive with God's will for your life, right? But if I'm just going off of, well, this is what they believe, but I don't know why they believe that, and then I'm following it, how can we create synergy? How can we create growth? How can I be a helpmeet? Oh man, so this stuff goes deep, and this is why what I should have did, but I didn't do, is with my book. I promised to provide a book club or a group where everybody can be in this. Everybody that's purchased my book can be a part of this group, and then I can just do deep dives like this. Like for instance, I haven't even made it halfway through. I've just struck the surface of this topic of the law of the pupil, and my book only gives you enough to point you in the right direction, but then the goal is to go a little further. And perhaps I need to do more of these sessions where I talk about the chapters in my book and I go even further into those particular concepts. So let me talk about what happens if you break this law real quick, because I think it's really important to know and understand that breaking the law of the pupil, what it will do is put stress on the intimacy and the influence of your marriage. See, the less you know about your spouse, the shallower the connection between the two of you will be. Also, if you break this law, you will risk creating, see, there's that word again, you will risk creating an unsafe environment for your spouse. See, if you don't even know what they require in order to feel safe, because you haven't done a good job of studying them, how can you effectively and intentionally create, there's that word again, create an environment that they feel the safest in? So creation has to be based off of knowledge. Knowledge has to be based off of what you have learned. But if I ain't learned nothing about what they need to feel safe, I'm going to be trying and I will be missing the mark. And by the way, husbands and wives specifically, give your spouse permission, give him permission to ask you what you like. Do not live in this fairy tale world. Hear me clearly. I'm not trying to sound facetious. I'm just speaking based off of my clinical experience. Do not live in this world where you have told yourself that if you guys are married, he should know all the answers. No. If you want him to know the truth, tell him the truth. That way he can then be responsible for said truth and take that truth to create an environment that helps you to feel safe. Okay? Because if you break this law, you're going to disrupt the intimacy and the influence that you guys can share. Now, in order to successfully apply this law inside of your marriage, you have to understand that you can't start and stop this process. So, to be successful, you have to become a student of your spouse, and you have to remain in the position of a student. You have to remain teachable. Always assume that there are additional things that you need to learn about your spouse. Understand that at each stage of life, and trust me, there will be multiple stages of life that you guys will go through the longer you're married to each other. But at each stage of life, they will change to accommodate that stage. Never, ever put them in a box, okay? Do not put them in a box. Do not pigeonhole them just because it's comfortable for you, just because you ain't got the energy. No, you need to apply the energy to learn how to be a better student of your spouse. So here's what I'm going to do. I'll wrap up here, and I want to give you guys an action item, something that you can do now, right? Something that you could do now. And don't worry, when we do our Mastering Marriage workshops, our virtual workshops, I will be able to take you guys even deeper in more action items and more activities with regards to this topic. But for now, here's what I want you to do. Take about 20 to 30 minutes, and I want you to interview your spouse. I want you to ask them open-ended questions that will help you to gain more information about a few key areas. So I'm going to list a few areas. I'll give you 6, and then I want you to do the rest, okay? So the first area that I want you to ask them a question about is their childhood. I talked about that earlier. The second area is their relationship with themselves. Number 3 is their relationship with others. The fourth area is their current view of money and how they came to this particular viewpoint. The fifth area is their current view of life. So their current view of life and how they came to this particular viewpoint. And then lastly, I want you to ask them or interview them about their personal perception and relationship with God. I know I said 20 to 30 minutes. This may take about an hour, but my point is split it up. Do 30 and 30, 10 and 10, but take time to ask them questions. And by the way, even if you feel like you have the information, ask them again, because it most likely have changed based off of the stage of life that they're in. And do not use words like I or me. So don't make it about you. This is not about you. This is about them. Accumulate and acquire information. Take notes, okay? Make sure you're writing and jotting things down, or record if they give you permission to. Do not talk about yourself at all. Again, this is an interview about them, not you. Do not interrupt them while they are talking, okay? So listen intently, and do not ask questions to validate your assumptions. So just because you have an assumption doesn't mean you get to ask questions to validate that, okay? Only focus on listening so that you can better develop your knowledge of your spouse. Do this as often as you can, okay? So don't feel like you have to just make this one assignment where it's one and done. You can ask them questions based off of the stage that they're in, based off of also what's going on in their life. New information, new details, interview them about that, okay? All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to wrap up here. And it is my desire that both you and your spouse use this information to take your marriage to the next level. But I want you to remember this, okay? You get out of your marriage what you put into your marriage, not what you want from your marriage. So get to work putting in the work. Anyways, I just want to say thank you guys for coming in to another information-packed session of the Marriage Counselor's Corner. Please remember to join me in episode number 24, where we're going to talk about another very important topic that you don't want to miss out on. Also, please don't forget to subscribe to this podcast. Leave me an honest rating and a review, and I will thank you for that. That way others can have access to these episodes, this marriage-changing, marriage-altering information. But anyway, again, I just want to say thank you for your time, for listening. Go out there, be great, stay out of trouble, do your homework, do your research, and I will talk to you later. Deuces.
Thanks for stopping by for your seat on the couch at the Marriage Counselor's Corner. Remember, go to marriagecounselorscorner.com to schedule your next session. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so that you never miss a session. We look forward to having you back on the couch soon. Bye-bye now.